It's almost a given that something will go wrong on every backpacking trip. It might be an injury or gear failure or bad weather, but something unexpected seems to always come up. That's why I say that the most important skill in backpacking isn't strength or gear, it's the ability to roll with the punches and adapt. But what if 2 things go wrong on the same trip? What if 4 things go wrong all on the same day? That's what happened on my worst day of backpacking, and there were times I genuinely feared for my survival, and I don't say that lightly. I've got a cozy fire going in the cabin today. Outside it's a cold January day with snow falling. Watching that snow come down brings me right back to a day on the CDT I still think about every time I step on the trail. That day changed the way I backpack in 6 specific ways, and I've never done things the same since. It was the 3rd day of a section hike of the Continental Divide Trail from Rogers Pass to McDonald Pass near Helena, Montana, and I woke up to a cold, soggy morning. The previous night, it occurred to me that I should really be storing my lighter with the stove since they were always used in tandem. Problem was, I hung the stove with my food and it rained that night. Food was protected, but the stove wasn't, so the lighter got soaked and wouldn't work. No problem, I told myself. This is why I always carry a ferro rod fire starter as a backup. But it was a problem because I was using an alcohol stove at the time. Now, denatured alcohol has some unique properties. The flame is invisible in daylight and it has very low surface tension, which means it spreads fast and doesn't pour cleanly. Those details would really matter later. What I discovered that morning was that alcohol stoves also need a steady flame, not sparks to light, because alcohol doesn't produce the kind of vapor that catches from a ferro rod like gasoline does. I briefly considered gathering tinder to light the stove instead, but everything was wet from the rain and I actually needed to get on the trail quickly, so I decided to drink my coffee cold and just eat a protein bar. Amazingly, it turned out that I like cold coffee, and it worked great to eat a cold breakfast and get a quick start on the day. So every trip since then, I plan at least one day when I want to have an early start to eat cold and just get going. That was the first thing that changed how I backpack. The second was learning to carry a backup lighter and stow them in different locations to minimize the chances of one failing. Now, I wanted an early start that day because I knew I would be hiking over the 2 high spots of the whole trip, Nevada Mountain and Black Mountain. It was Memorial Day weekend too, so there was likely to be snow, and I wanted to get over them early in the day while the snow was still consolidated to minimize post-holing. The day began with a stupendous high alpine ridge walk, my favorite kind of hiking, when it feels like you're flying over the terrain. The views were amazing, and even the ground was fascinating as it was sprinkled with these succulents and low-growing hardy flowers that were already blooming. I encountered snow in a few places, but it wasn't bad, and most of the trail had melted out already, making for pretty quick hiking. That ended as I approached Nevada Mountain. One of the unique aspects of this section of the CDT is that at times it feels very remote. Other times the trail crosses roads and even follows roads and jeep paths for a mile or two. Also, there are many trails taking off to the side, which lead to roads in just a few miles. Before heading up Nevada Mountain, I encountered a trail going straight down to the valley. Since I lived in Helena for 6 years, I knew how easy it would be to hike down that trail, hitch a ride, and be in town in a couple hours. And I recall standing for a long time looking down that trail and then up at the snow-covered mountain and contemplating that choice. Ultimately, I headed up the mountain, and it wasn't long before I was regretting it. I began post-holing up to my knees a few times, and then nearly every step. But the bigger problem with hiking in the snow is the difficulty following the trail. There were occasional blazes, but way too few to follow, and it was tempting to just take off in the direction I thought I should go, but I know that you can get in trouble really fast and far off the trail in a hurry. So I kept climbing, searching for the trail, backtracking when I lost it, and post-holing all the way. Eventually, I reached the summit and headed down the far side, tired but happy to be making progress. The snow cleared up, I reached a low saddle, then started back up another rise which I assumed to be Black Mountain. The same pattern repeated, post-holing, searching for the trail, until I made it to another high point and headed down. By then, I was getting pretty tired, but figured that's fine since I was past both mountains. That's when I came to this junction. Trying to make out the severely weathered writing on the sign, a sinking feeling came over me as I realized what it was saying. Black Mountain, the highest point of the entire hike at 8,200 feet, was still ahead of me. I had only finished one of the mountains, and now it was 4 o'clock, hours after the warmest part of the day. I again considered bailing down the side trail, but chose to press on, promising to do better research in the future of snow levels, contours, and the distances between obstacles on the trail. The northern side of Black Mountain is steep and sheltered, so it wasn't long before I was post-holing again, this time up to my mid-thigh and a few times even waist deep. That was the moment it hit me. I could be in real trouble. I was still able to climb out of the holes using my trekking poles to brace horizontally on top of the snow, but what if I fall in a hole so deep I can't get out? I had to stop again and pull on neoprene knee braces on both legs because falling through the snow was so hard on my knees. Finally, I made it to the summit, but even though exhausted, I couldn't rest because I was greeted by this incoming thunderstorm. I knew I had to get off the mountain as quickly as possible, so kept moving, thankfully headed downhill now, but still punching through the snow. Breaking out from the snow at the bottom was like pulling the curtain back to discover all of my favorite people in one place welcoming me home. The trail opened up to the warm embrace of this oasis called Dana Spring. I grabbed some water and drank greedily because I had been out for some time. Tired, but happy to have made it here, I got ready to make dinner. Since it was breezy, I put the alcohol stove between my outstretched legs to shelter it. The lighter was working now, so my plan was to light the stove, then move it quickly from between my legs to the side. Unfortunately, another thing I discovered that day was that alcohol stoves, when lit, are instantly burning hot. So I only got halfway when I dropped the stove right over my left leg. Remember when I said you can't see the flames and alcohol spreads quickly? I sat there staring at my leg, thinking the flame must have gone out as I dropped the stove, when my pant leg shriveled and just disappeared. I realized it was on fire, and I patted myself and the ground down quickly, frantically, hoping I was extinguishing the invisible flames. That worked, but not before my pant leg was completely gone. The only thing that saved me from a severe burn was the fact that I was still wearing the knee brace, and the synthetic material of the pants had stuck to that instead of my flesh. I freely admit it was my own stupidity and tired mind that led to that disaster, but that trip was the last time I ever used an alcohol stove. And yet, even on the worst day in the woods, amazing things like this can happen. They clearly wanted to get to the water, but weren't sure what to do about me, so just circled around instead, while I finally ate a cold dinner. But the day wasn't over yet. I only had enough energy left to hike about a half a mile uphill from the spring and then set up camp in a meadow. Seemed like a good spot at the time, but that night another thunderstorm moved in. As the lightning began to flash, I wondered if I should pack up and move closer to the trees, not under the tallest one, of course, but out in the meadow, I was the tallest thing. Before I could decide, the rain began, and it was the hardest rainfall I've ever encountered. This was during my early years of exploring ultralight gear, and I was using the Mountain Laurel Designs Dual Mid with just a Tyvek ground cloth. Great shelter, by the way, but the problem with not using an inner tent is that there is nothing to keep your gear inside the drip edge. So I kept turning on the headlamp to check and see and make sure nothing had scooted outside the shelter. This was just my third night in the dual mid, so I didn't feel secure at all about it. Another problem was that since I had such a challenging day of hiking, there wasn't a chance to dry my shelter, and it was soaked on the inside from being packed up wet. The rain was hitting so hard, it was knocking that moisture off, and it felt like it was raining on me directly. Between the lightning and the pounding rain soaking me, This was the second time today I wondered about my chances of survival. I curled up in a fetal ball, planning to hunker down until the shelter collapsed, which I was sure it was going to do, and then I'd gather everything and try to set up again closer to the trees. I promised myself I would never again neglect to take the time to dry out the shelter during the day. After this trip, I did the math and realized that carrying the inner tent instead of the Tyvek only cost 6 ounces more and provided not just bug protection, but consolidation of gear. So the sixth change was that it was worth the weight penalty to have an enclosed shelter. The torrential rain continued for about 4 hours, but the shelter held, and I passed a sleepless night. Dawn came, and the very next day was actually one of my favorites on the trail, mainly due to my love of history. I made it to Mullen Pass, which is part of the famous Mullen Road, and there on the pass is this cool monument to the first meeting of the Masons in Montana. I got pinned down for an hour by another thunderstorm, this time with hail. But that created this wonderful double rainbow. Between Mullen Pass and Priest Pass lie the remnants of the Northern Pacific Railroad as it climbed over the Continental Divide, with this amazing trestle still standing. And I camped at Priest Pass, which gets its name from Valentine Priest, who built a cabin here in the 1800s and made his living charging travelers a toll to cross the mountains. I found this cool old fence post grown into the tree, which indicated that I was probably sleeping right about where the old cabin stood. I slept soundly that night, happy to be alive, happy to have experienced all of it, the disasters and the rainbows, and glad that I made it through and would be home in one more day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.